In spring a few years ago, I moved out of state for graduate school. Being new to the area and slow to meet people in general, I spent my free time exploring the surroundings by myself, or I would drive a few hours north to be with my fiancé. One long weekend I decided to take a little road trip to the south coast of Oregon and do a solo overnight backpacking trip on a trail that had been long on my wish list. To elaborate about me, I am a short female of slight build, nothing threatening about me, and I'm well aware that I am vulnerable when I go out of town. However, I have a lot of backcountry experience and have gone on many hikes before, without incident. Up to this point, I had only positive experiences with people in the backcountry. Anyway, I leave super early in the morning to get to the trailhead by morning. I get my things together for the hike. The trail was a national forest land and follows the length of a beautiful river. It's popular with rafters and hikers alike. This helps to make me feel at ease, but something feels off this time. I feel physically uneasy, but I brush it off as anxiety being in a new and unfamiliar place and set off on my hike. I had planned to camp at a spot next to the river, about 8 miles, and a hike the first few miles of the trail and peace passing the occasional group of hikers coming in the opposite direction. It was a gorgeous day. The sunlight dappled the trail, and once in a while we get a peek of the brilliant blue of the river through the trees. Birds were chirping. I was starting to feel more comfortable as I walked on. My only concern was avoiding the poison oak that stretched into the trail and brush my legs. At one stretch in the trail, I noticed a man stopped about 10 meters ahead of me. He was looking directly my way as I approached, and I could clearly see he was looking at me coming toward him. He made me feel uneasy. It was a bit odd to stare someone down like that, with such intense interest. When I got closer, he moved to the side of the trail and abruptly turned his back and bent over as if to tie a shoe. I took this as a sign that he didn't want to talk and was relieved. I just wanted to get by him. I greeted him as I passed. He made a show of acting surprised in my presence and said, "Oh, you snuck up on me there. I didn't see you." This was odd because he definitely saw me. But I just replied with, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." He took this as a means to start a polite conversation. "Where are you hiking today?" he asked. "Oh, the camp 8 miles in. I say there's a big group there tonight. So I'm coming back from that way." He's average build and elderly, maybe about 60 or so. He's wearing a gray tank top with sweat stains under the armpits and is shining with sweat. His hair is gray about shoulder length and curly, rosy cheeks. As I stand there, he's looking me up and down as if I were a piece of meat. Dirty old man. I think I thanked him for the helpful tip about to wish him well on his high count. He continued with more questions. "Where are you from? Who are you hiking with today?" I start a series of unwise truthful answers to his questions by telling him I'm new to the area and I'm originally from across the country. Though I've been living in various places across the West Coast for some time. When he asks where my family and fiancé are, I tell them back east/up north. When he asks if I know anyone around my new town, I say no. He asked what kind of car I drive, and I tell him as I am telling him that I am alone and my loved ones are far away and unaware of my specific whereabouts. It occurs to me that I should be lying about all this stuff. Inwardly, I'm starting to panic and I'm cursing my stupidity. This guy has off. These questions aren't what people with good intentions ask. I start to ask him questions of my own just to stop talking about me, because I don't know what else to do. He's a retired fisherman from the next town over. He hikes trails all over the South Coast. Finally, after about 15 minutes of conversation, I say I better get going. He reminds me that I should set up camp at the alternative spot he recommended and tells me what a pleasure it was that I snuck up on him. He then said something that set off the alarm bells. "I'll be seeing you soon." After we parked, I can barely continue down the trail because my legs feel weak. I'm holding back tears. I pass one other group, but I don't feel safe and my mind starts racing through my options. I know at the very least I don't want to camp in any designated campsite. I have a strong feeling that this guy is not actually on his way back to the trailhead and decide to get off where I have a suitable vantage point of the trail. I'll hunker down there and watch for him. If I don't see him, I just thought I would just spend an uncomfortable night in a hidden roost-off trail, turn left off the trail around a bend that hid me from view for anyone walking that same direction. I thrashed through the poison oak and brushed to a spot among some oak trees that offered a somewhat protected spot to watch the trail. I shed my gear and flattened myself out and eyes on trail. As I wait, I worry about all sorts of things. Am I even hidden? Am I being ridiculous? Sure enough, however, I see him after about 10 minutes of my stakeout. He is swiftly hiking back up the trail in the direction I was going. He's looking straight ahead and doesn't see me peeking out of the trees. I have another flurry of panic and uncertainty about what I should do, but ultimately decide to wait for somebody to come down in the trail in the direction of the trailhead, who I would then follow out in a relatively close proximity. I have to wait another 15 minutes for another group to pass by before I make my way down the hillside for the hike out. When I get to my car, I don't even bother changing out of my sweaty hiking clothing and boots. I drive straight home, thankful that all I got from the road trip was some rashes from the poison oak. I was 16 and on a road trip to Florida with my best friend Cal and my parents. We decided to stop over at a cheap motel in West Virginia to sleep for the night. We go there at about 10 p.m. and being two teenage girls had been sitting in a car for the last day, we were still wound up. We explored running into this group of guys with thick southern accents. They tried their hand at awkward teenage flirting before giving up. I will never forget Cal's excuse for not giving her number. She told them she had accidentally microwaved her phone last month. So we just parted ways, knowing that we're normal albeit it's awkward teenage boys. Cal and I kept exploring the motels for us before deciding to race each other down the first floor's main hallway sort of right next to the lobby. As we're laughing and speeding down this hallway, we run past this room with the door wide open. And since I was running at full speed, all I saw was a bunch of shiny things all over the floor in front of and in the doorway, and a big blobby bar in the middle of it. We get to the end of the hallway and ask each other what the hell that was. We snaked back slow and pure around the corner and in the doorway of this room. There's this really obese man lying on his stomach with his chin resting on his hands. Like he's trying to be cute. And all around him, he's got silverware and tiny metal trinkets laid out. When he noticed us, he smiled weirdly, but didn't move anything besides his torso to face us a little better. Which bring back to my parents' room, but they're out getting food, so we're alone. We freak out / make fun of the situation for like 15 minutes, then decide to go back down. On the stairway from the second floor, we run into that same group of boys from earlier. One of them asks if we saw the weird guy down there, and when we say yeah, the guy start freaking out. One of the kids tells us that his little brother had been walking down the hallway from their room on the other end of the first floor to the vending machines, and that the weird guy called out to him and tried to stop him. He asked him if he wanted to come in his room and offered him one of his weird trinkets. The kid had the good sense to say no thanks. But what the hell was the guy trying to get a kid in his room for? I think the hotel manager eventually stepped in and made the guy close his door. I hope that kid's parents complained or called the cops. I was too young to realize how messed up that was. So to make light of a cow when I nicknamed that guy that wiggling West Virginia spoon man made for a really wild story that no one believed when we got back to school after rake. When I was younger, each summer and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our hometown in North Texas at around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning. So around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico. And that's when things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive. And I remember sleeping, but still being semi-conscious of what was around me, because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her, Miguel. Well, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo. My dad picked up the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reno, so we're another city, and he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got tired pretty quick. He's getting closer, my mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car got closer and closer to ours. He's too close, Miguel, and she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car and on our when we stretch off highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight. It was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more. Like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over right in front of the police, pull over right now, Miguel," and he did, and the car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as they watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car and the way it followed us and taunted us. The police took her claim seriously and told us about how people were victimized and had their car stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. And then he offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved, until about 10 minutes later when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. 10 minutes later, we saw the car pulled over on the side of the roadway too.